What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Montana Method Podcast. One more time, as always, your host, Nelson Rodriguez Jr., author of Montana Method. Today, bringing you an awesome guest. Mr. Keyen is in the building. I'm excited to have him in my space. We're going to talk all things 2024, very relevant topics, what he's up to, his background, how we met, why he's so awesome, why I wanted him on my podcast, and a bunch of other stuff you do not want to miss. So here we go. Elijah, kick it.
I've been out here hustling all my life. Every day we get into it. Really out here in these streets. That's day and night. Like there's nothing to it. When I was going through it, dog, I never got your call. I never asked for nothing, no. But now I want it all. I promise I'ma do it. Came from rags to riches. Rags to riches. Came from rags to riches. Rags to riches. Came from rags.
Yo, Nelson, thanks for having me, man. I'm stoked to fucking be here. We're going to go in today, talk about some really relevant topics in today's world, all things masculinity related, which I think is very controversial right now.
Definitely.
So we're going to be sharing some good stuff.
It's funny how just talking about things that are happening in the world considers you controversial nowadays.
Oh, I know, right? Anything said at all that's an opinion seems to be relatively controversial.
Yeah, that's part of... So I guess we'll get right into it. Here's my issue with modern men, right?
Let's do it.
Oh, women, no, all they want is money and okay, all right. Who wants to date a broke man? Who wants to date a broke person? I'm going to take it a step further. If you don't take care of your finances and you don't think that's important, that says a lot about your character, right? In order to be, people talk about balance. In order to be a truly balanced individual, you have to be spiritually balanced, physically balanced. In your career, you need to be balanced. In your finances, you need to be balanced, right? So if you don't have that, how are you... Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, you have to be a certain stable... Have some stability in life to be able to have a good relationship with a woman if we're talking about a heterosexual man. Yes. So that's part of my issue with modern men. I see a lot of, especially in Miami, right, where we have the super hot women that are, high maintenance. I get it. So they bitch and moan, all they want is money. And it's like, well, it's not really like that. It's more like no one wants to date someone who doesn't have anything going for themselves.
Correct.
So,
yeah, absolutely. And the other part of that, too, is which I'm finding with men is that they're very emotionally disconnected from themselves. And so if all you have to offer is money potentially, then naturally you're going to get used for it.
Exactly.
So what you can bring to the table if you have a diversified portfolio of what you can bring to the table for a woman outside of just financial, then they're going to be satisfied with that. And so if you don't know how to emotionally connect with a woman and be able to meet her where she is, then naturally you're going to get used. So I think that's important to know, like for all the guys out there that may say that, and that yes, it is important, as you said in the beginning, to be able to pursue making money in something that you feel excited about.
Right.
But ultimately, it says something more about your character than anything if you're complaining about it instead of actually doing something about it.
100%.
So either way, if you are complaining about it or not, it doesn't serve you to be able to be someone that's complaining about women. Right? Women are women. So you can either adapt and understand women or bitch about them. And so I think it's important to be able to understand the foundations and more like primitive ways that women operate, but also how women have evolved in today's world. So that's why I think it's very confusing for men now, because we're living in a time where women still are dominated by their primitive ways of being, which men are too. We all are, but we are in different times. So that changes the way that women's attraction is as well. So if we can go deeper into that, I think that'd be really good for guys to be able to understand the changing times, how women generally function, to be able to not complain about women and ultimately exit the game of pursuing women, but feel empowered through knowing how they work and how they function generally to be able to be more empowered in that space with women instead of bitching about them.
So you'd have to start with biology, right? If we go back to really primitive times like when we were cavemen, God, the universe, science. I'm not gonna get into faith and all that stuff, but men were created with a certain physiology. We're stronger, we're bigger, more muscularly developed in order to protect the female species because she is the sole carrier of the advancement of the human race, obviously. So women were made in a way, created, designed, whatever you want to say, in a way to create human beings and nurture the species. And we were created to protect and provide. So physically, we're designed that way, right? Men and women.
Yes.
And I'm a person that if you try to like, you can't go against our nature. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's going against nature is only gonna create like catastrophic results. You know what I'm saying? So that is what I'm seeing as well in today's society. Since we're trying to go against the grain, it's kind of like that's why you see this clash and this confusion on both sides.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't know. Maybe if you have something to chime in on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd like to chime in on the way things have changed. So we can either complain about women being much more advanced as humans, or
Right.
we can adapt and understand that it's a good thing that women have become more evolved and capable. Because if you know how women work, then naturally women's capabilities that have increased can serve you.
100%.
So if you're with a woman that is
Right.
very empowered and she knows she's very well versed in many things and she has the ability to know how things generally work and function, then you only benefit from that.
Right.
So I think the only guys that are really upset about it are ones that don't understand women. So they can't capitalize on the increased understanding that women have emotionally and mentally of how the world works.
Agreed.
So I think it starts with emotional intelligence. It starts with the capacity to know yourself, to go deep within yourself, to be able to then connect with a woman. If you don't know yourself as an individual, separate from the man that you were, from your upbringing and from the people that have influenced you in your life, you can't possibly healthfully read her in a way
Right.
that you can connect with her. So emotionally now it requires men to have to go deep within themselves because women have evolved so much. Whereas in the past, if you were just a provider, then
That was enough.
That was enough.
Right.
But because women becoming much more capable in their mental and emotional capacities, now we have to expand beyond that. And I know it sounds like a lot, but that's just the reality of how things are. So the question is, well, how do you know yourself more as a man? How do you understand yourself at a deeper level to be able to then communicate with a woman where she feels comfortable and confident in your presence?
I'm gonna recommend everybody go buy a book called New Man Emerging by my friend, and my friend wrote it. His name is Michael Santi. I've actually had him on the podcast, and he talks a lot about what you're talking about now. What he talks about in the book is the new man emerging in this era is we're being called to be dynamic, whereas where we could have been one dimensional a long time ago,
Yes.
and that was the belief. Now that's not the case anymore. It's this there is like this kind of stigma of like the man should just provide and make money and you know being emotionally available and being as much as around his kids as the wife and all that stuff. That was like traditional, right? But now it's like we live in a different era where we have access to technology and we have access to different ways of making money. We have access to different things. We have access to information at the end of the day. So there's no excuse anymore as to why you can't provide and be there for your kids and be there for your wife and be, a good husband, good parent, whatever. So a great book. I recommend everybody go buy it. It reminded me, what you're saying reminded me of that book because I think men are being called to be more or to at least evolve, not so much cast away from our nature, because our nature is to provide and be protectors and all that stuff. But aside from that, there are other things that we have become capable of due to the times where you're right. Emotional intelligence is a huge part of it. And me personally, coming from a culture where I think it's universal among men, but specifically in my culture, the way I was raised, as a man, you're not really supposed to, like show emotion or stop crying, all that stuff. My dad is very macho. He's very like a very macho man, and that wasn't allowed. Like he was like, men don't cry, men don't bitch and moan, So there's a side of me where I want to be a strong man and not be weak, right, and not complain and bitch and moan about situations. And there's also a side of me where I need to understand what's going on within my own emotions.
Yes. And there is a middle ground in that too, right? And I think a lot of men don't see that.
Right.
You're either stoic and not expressing anything, or you're an emotional little baby. And I think that's the two ends of the extremes that men generally think in. But the truth is that when you understand how you're feeling and why you're feeling the way that you are, you can then you can communicate that to a woman or the people around you that you're with. So I can express where I'm at right now without ejaculating onto you my emotion.
Right.
And because whether we believe it or not, women feel everything.
100%.
Like women always know, oftentimes before we might even know that we're off emotionally
Yes.
or there's something off in the relationship. So being able to say you did have a bad day. There's a difference between coming home and be like, oh my gosh, worked so hard. I had such a bad day. This happened at the office. This was so terrible. I can't believe this person said this to me. Can you believe this? And you feel the heaviness in that, right?
Yeah,
No woman wants to receive that. Compared to you get home, she asks, honey, how was your day? And you say, well, today had a lot of challenges and it did test me and I feel a little worn out. You feel a difference in that?
Totally. And you're saying almost the same thing.
Exactly. But one is emotionally ejaculating and the other one is speaking from a place of confidence and communicating what's actually happening inside of me.
Right.
But if you don't understand your emotions at a deeper level, you can't effectively do that.
100%.
And you will be a victim to your emotion, which always ends up killing polarity or sexual desire that a woman has for you in the long
100%.
run. So regardless of what women say, I want men to be more emotional. No, they don't. They don't want men to become more emotional. Okay. There's something to be said about that era of your dad, my dad, that were much more naturally stoic in their ways. But the one thing they didn't have the ability to do was to effectively communicate where they're at.
100%.
Probably because they didn't have to know, they didn't have the capabilities to have the time to understand themselves more because they were just needing to provide.
Right.
Whereas we live in a day and age where we're much more removed from survival. We have much more space and capacity to be able to live, not be as like strung out, I think, as our parents were. So we're less in survival, so we have to be able to adapt to that. But that's really it. It's having the capacity to be able to effectively communicate where you're at without blowing your load all over a girl in the form of metaphorically in your emotions. So
yeah, and that's on. So that first version of what you said about coming home from work and telling your wife, that's exactly how a woman would describe her day.
Exactly.
It's a feminine trait. So there's a balance. It's becoming emotionally intelligent, but not being feminine.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. It's effectively communicating. It's effectively communicating where you're at. And so let's keep in mind too, because a lot of guys listening to this might be like, well, my woman wants me to be more emotional. Like she actually doesn't want you to be more emotional.
No.
She wants you to be able to be better at effectively communicating where you are.
Correct.
And not dumping your emotions onto her or acting like there's nothing wrong when clearly there's
something wrong. And I'll take it a step further. They don't want you to be emotional. They want you to be emotionally aware of where they are. They want you to be emotionally aware of what's going on with them. Because once you're aware of what's going on with them, you'll be able, that whole thing of, oh, my wife's mad at me and I don't know why, won't happen. Because since you're emotionally aware of how you're feeling and you're emotionally intelligent of your own situation within you, you're also going to translate that into emotional intelligence of what's going on with her. You're going to be able to sense certain things, right? So that's something I've noticed. I want men to be more vulnerable. Vulnerability really just means they want you to be aware of how they feel.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, being able to effectively communicate where you are and then be able to be in tune with where she's at.
Yep.
But if you're emotionally discombobulated within yourself, you don't have the ability to know where she's at.
100%.
So that's the process that I take people through, is understanding themselves at a deeper level. And ultimately through that, you have a much greater capacity to effectively show up for a woman the way that you need to.
150%. Before we started the podcast, Ian brought up a really good song. The Way
By
I Am
Eminem.
is by Eminem, right?
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it.
The Way
but
I Am.
That was the verse.
I think The Way I Am is the name of the movie, the name of the song, and you were saying I am whatever you say I am, and that you broke down that song and you kind of like really tell me about that.
Yeah. So if you know yourself and you know who you are and you know where you're going, then it doesn't really matter what anybody says. If you don't know who you are and you don't know where you're going, then naturally you're going to be much more swayed and affected by the thoughts, feelings, and opinions of other people that they have about you.
150%.
And that right there is masculinity at the highest level.
Right.
Pursuing your God-ordained path separate from what the world says about it.
Yes.
And so that's really the biggest benefit of knowing yourself at a deeper level, knowing where you're vulnerable, knowing where you have cracks in your foundation of caring about what other people think about what you're doing. And if you can solve those things and get very clear about who you are and what you want as a man, then a lot of the other stuff just kind of takes care of itself. And you don't have to I've noticed with a lot of my clients, as they go deeper in understanding themselves and having more conviction in who they are, they naturally just start to do the things that all the guys on the internet talking about game tell you that you should say and do.
Right.
It's like they come to me and they're like, oh, I just said this to my wife. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, where'd you learn that? He's like, dude, I just felt it and I said it. I'm like, that's shit that people talk about on the internet as far as like how to game girls. But the truth is that when you're anchored into who you are and you have conviction in who you are and where you're going, then you naturally begin to embody the certain traits, characteristics, and even ways of speaking.
That's inside of all of us.
Yeah, that a lot of the game, how to pick up chicks, guys talk about.
Yeah, that's
it's a byproduct.
That's just, so remember how I was saying before we started, shout out to my friend Carl. Carl met me probably going on 15 years ago. I was a kid. I was literally an 18-year-old kid when he met me, just trying to figure out life. And as time progressed, I peeled back the layers, and I got to really to the core of who I am eventually after years and years of working on myself. And I noticed that confidence isn't something that you acquire. In my specific situation, confidence wasn't something that one day I woke up and I found the secret and I was like, all right, this is how I get to be confident. Confidence was more stripping away what wasn't authentically me.
Yes. Oof.
And then once I got to my core self and I knew I knew who I was.
Yeah. You found it.
I was confident because I understood myself. I knew what I wanted. I knew who I was.
Yes.
And I knew what I was capable of and what I could offer to the world. And once you understand that about yourself, you're confident no matter what, 150%. Because once you understand what you're capable of, like, the sky's the limit. There's no stopping you. And once you realize that that's the possibility of who you can be, why wouldn't you be confident?
Yes.
You know?
No, it's true. But with that being said, though, I mean, I love the way that you worded all of that. It was beautifully said, stripping away the layers of who you're not to be able to find who you were, and through that, find your confidence. Super powerful. But at the same time, when you do find that, I don't know if your experience is the same, but when you do find that core of who you are and what you want, where you want to go, I still am tested all the time.
Of course.
Right? I'm tested all the time.
Yeah.
But the difference is that I have an anchor point.
Right.
I know where to go back to when I am feeling tested.
Yes.
Instead of just being a tumbleweed, getting tossed around in every direction.
Yep.
And so I think the difference between me and someone else, having an anchor point of knowing what I want, where I'm going, and who I am, when I am tested by other people or by the world, I have the ability to go back to that and be like, okay, this is who I am, this is where I'm going. But we live in a time where we are massively influenced to not be connected to that center place within us.
Right.
And is it intentional or not? I don't know. But what I do know is that we're exposed to so many different thoughts, opinions, and feelings of people at all times. We're exposed to tons of podcasts like this. We're exposed to tons of songs and people's opinions on social media and influencers constantly telling us what we should want.
Right.
And if you know who you are and where you're going, that could be very beneficial because then you can strategically use podcasts and you can use different influencers based off of their expertise. If you want to acquire that specific type of skill or understanding, it's super powerful. But if you don't know who you are and you don't know where you're going and you're just mindlessly consuming information and
it's all noise.
It's all noise and it's filling up your headspace, and you're going to be influenced by all those different voices to do different things at all times and not 100%. Ever really able to have conviction in the thing that you're doing. So we live in that time where self-belief is constantly questioned because we're constantly disconnected from ourselves. And self-belief, at the end of the day, I mean, if you haven't read a book called by Ralph Waldo Emerson,
Man's Search for Meaning.
Yep, incredible book. But he's also got a couple other ones that are fascinating in regard to self-belief. And we do live in a time that's very difficult to be able to stay connected to ourselves because we're bombarded by information all the time. So it's a constant practice. It's really, that to me is meditation, the constant practice of not allowing myself to get sucked into the vortex of influence. And I think I'm really fucking good at it. I could talk more about it because it's everything. It's so important.
Yes. We, as a society and as humans, we search externally for solutions. And most of the time, you don't realize that every answer you'll ever need will come to you if you just turn everything off for a second and listen to yourself. You know what I mean? At first, when I started meditating a couple years ago, and at first when I started, I wouldn't be able to focus. And that was my ego and that side of me, or what I thought was me, trying to get me to stop. You know, he doesn't want you to reflect, doesn't want you to stop for a second, doesn't want you to just pay attention to what's in here and in here.
Yes.
And once that voice calmed down through discipline and like just focus and constant effort, I realized that if I just stood still and I was quiet, and I made my mind get quiet, you know, quiet the mind, like the samurai says, things really do come to you, because most of the time you can figure any obstacle you'll ever face, any challenge you'll ever face, you can figure it out. It's just a matter of really being able to think clearly and being in a state of mind to where you're prepared to really look at this for what it is and not for what it might look like. Or because most of the time we think an anthill, you know, we make a, what's the old saying? You make a mountain out of a molehill.
Yeah.
The molehill is really the challenge that we're seeking that's in front of us most of the time. But because of all the stimulation and all the stuff that's going on, we can't really just look at it and really be like, okay, it's not that big. It turns into this huge thing. And that's what I found me myself. Once I quiet my mind and all other things are just pushed out for a little bit and I see things clearly, the answers just come to me. You know what I mean? It's incredible that all these books, like, you know, all Buddhism and all this stuff has been around for thousands of years, and things that were discovered, I don't know how many thousands of years ago, are still relevant today. Goes to show you humanity hasn't changed that much.
Yeah, it's true.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really fascinating, too, just the concept of reading so many books. I think that can be another form of staying disconnected from the self as well. I think people can get obsessed with that. Because there was a time when men didn't have access to unlimited resources and understanding.
Yep.
So I think about that sometimes. I'm like, well, if there was a time when men didn't have unlimited resources, but somehow they became incredibly successful, like, how did they do that? And when I started reading into that a little bit, it was pretty fascinating to hear about the journeys that some men had and their connection with God. And being able to literally be spoken to by God, like the conviction that they had in what they were doing, speaking from a place of God delivering that to them. And I believe that came from being in a state of receptivity and openness to hearing what that is. And I don't think you can do that if you don't stop and slow down and sit with yourself and ultimately connect with God. And so that's something that I make a practice of doing, is connecting with God, not from the standpoint of a religious affiliation, but from the standpoint of just being very connected to that voice that exists within me. I don't believe that I am God, but I believe that God speaks through me. And ultimately, when I get out of the way, then God can execute whatever he needs to execute. So I find that most of the work that I do for myself, even with my clients, is just getting out of the way. Not as much conscious action, but more getting out of the way of the inspiration that God's trying to communicate to me. And so it's really a practice of me as myself, as the computer of a mind that I have based on, or that's programmed based off my environmental upbringing. That's very limited in my capacity to know what is and isn't the best thing for me. It's getting out of the way and allowing that inspiration to roll through me. And it's very uncomfortable at times. There's things that God communicates to me that really offend who I am. I get offended all the time by the inspirations that God plants on my heart. I'm like, oh, really? Like, that's not who I am, or that's not how I'm taught to be, or that's not societally accepted, or that's not generally ethical per se. And I have to allow myself to do it. I have to let go and get out of the way. It's the same thing in my coaching practice. All I do in the space when I'm working with people is constantly removing myself. Whenever my voice kicks into my head that wants to try to control, I shut it off. I shut it off. And just keep coming back to the moment of what's coming up inside of me, no matter how scary it is, and allow myself just to continue to speak through that. But it doesn't mean it's easy, but it is like any skill set. And the more you can detach from the voice that is trying to convince you to not be connected to that God ordained inspiration, the easier it becomes over time.
That's a whole nother conversation, right? Because if you believe that there's no God, and if you believe that there's no higher power, then there's no consequences to anything.
Well, it just I don't think it makes sense. I don't think it, like, because I've gone there. I've gone to that place of like completely, because I came from a religious background. I went to a place of entirely eliminating the concept that there is or was a God at all, and found that it was a little bit bleak. Like I took there's a lot more personal responsibility that was had, which is I think a very cool thing. When you go to that place of saying there is no God, then you can then turn it and reflect on yourself and be like, okay, well, I'm not going to turn to God. I'm going to turn to myself. What's actually going on inside of me? So instead of giving it up to God, what if I actually reflected a little bit inside of myself and said, well, how do I solve this problem? What's coming up? Which is a very, very powerful exercise that I still implement. But it just didn't make sense not to tune into something greater than me because it was limiting me.
100%.
So if you just understand that, it's like, well, why would I not? It's just purely out of a place of wanting to think that there's not.
100%.
It only benefits me to believe that there is something beyond me and greater than me. So at least in my personal experience.
No, I'm with it, because if I'm backed by a force that created the universe that is so grand and so magical and so powerful that it can literally do anything,
yes,
and that force has my back, I mean,
why would you not?
Why would I not believe that?
Yeah.
And not only why would I not believe that, it's... So I saw something Stephen Hawking said, and I thought it was... I couldn't even believe. He said, you have a better chance of going to a beach and grabbing one specific grain of sand while you're blindfolded than the universe being made by just chance and it being this thing just splashed, the artist just splashing a bunch of paint on a paper. That he said that it was like similar to thinking that some ink, some pages, and some binding fell from the sky and it all magically just fell into place and it became, a book.
Yes.
This was designed. Now, who designed it? Hey, listen, I don't have all the answers. But what I can tell you is that everything is created in such a way to where I choose to believe that we were created and we were designed. If you don't believe that, that's okay. But there are many benefits, like you were saying, to believing in something that's greater than you. And going back to what I was saying is, life gets kind of dark because there's no consequences to what I do. I can do whatever really, really dark, evil things, and what does it matter if I do it or not? Because there's no consequence. I'm not going to heaven. I'm not going to hell, or there's no consequences to what I do. You know what I mean? Whereas someone who does have some sort of faith understands that there's repercussions to what you choose to do in this life, and whether you pay for it now or later, whether you believe in karma or the afterlife or whatever it is, you're gonna pay for those things. And if you do good things, you're also gonna be rewarded. So, me personally, I believe a little more in like karmic energy. So whatever good I put out is what I make sure, that the whole thing multiplies and it comes back to me and all that stuff. The best thing I can do is help out others and put that out into the universe. So that is just too bleak for me to think that there's no purpose. That none of this has any purpose. It's whatever, everything is just kind of by chance and things kind of happen the way they happen, and nothing has an innate reason for being or an innate reason for happening. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, no, completely. And I subscribe to a different narrative. I choose to believe that there is something that exists beyond me and that this isn't all completely random, but as far as defining what it is or even going as deep as karma in any way, shape, or form or heaven or hell, I don't have that belief that is there or exists. Partially because I think I'm more focused on how to live the most optimal life here on earth right now. And I think there's a idea that people think that means obsessively pursuing only material wealth.
Right.
But I don't believe that's the case. I believe if I want to thrive at the highest level here on earth, yes, I want to accumulate massive material wealth, but also intimacy and connection is very, very important be able to also live the most ultimate human experience. So even beyond heaven and hell, thinking about right now, my time here on earth, it comes down to what you're talking about, but not needing karma or not needing heaven or hell to inspire me to want to live the best possible experience. But if that's what somebody needs or believes to be able to inspire them to want to do that, I think that's great. And whatever people need to do that, I think that's phenomenal.
Right.
But I'm just thinking about purely my experience here on earth. And if I want to live that best experience, I have to be able to selfishly pursue what I want, but also have deep intimacy and connection at the same time, and which naturally causes me to embody the behavior in which you're talking about.
I recently heard a song, I forgot the name of it, where they have you know how some songs have like a snippet of a speech of someone giving a speech or
Yes.
something? I think it was Simon Sinek. I don't remember. And he said, at the end of your life, when you're 90 and you're at the end about to die or whatever, you're not gonna say I should have spent more time on the internet. You're not gonna say I should have slept more. You're not gonna say I should have had a nicer iPhone. You're not gonna say any of that crap. What you're gonna say is I should have spent more time with the people I love. There's something about intimacy and connection and just being around people that you genuinely care about. I recently I clipped an audio of from a podcast to use in one of my clips, and it was the George Janko podcast episode that he had with Andrew Tate, and Andrew Tate said, you know, whether you're at $1 billion or you're at the bottom, there's nothing better than just, talking shit with your boys. There's something about that camaraderie and being around people that you can trust and people that really care about you and people you really care about. There's nothing better than that. And I think I almost agree with him.
Why do you say almost?
Because it's different. There's different intimacy. There's intimate friendships, but then there's intimate relationships with a significant other. I mean, spending time with a woman that loves you, that intimately, like as a partner, you literally share everything. So it's just different.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say it's better, but it's different.
But staying on that topic of spending time with the boys in that way, that's another way to develop deeper level of conviction in who you are and where you're going. If you're surrounding yourself with men that are the same. Now, if you're surrounding yourself with men that aren't that way, which I don't want to go into because I think it's overly talked about as far as who you spend the most time with, naturally you become. Okay, we don't have to talk about that.
Everybody loves that.
Everybody loves that. Okay, but going deeper into it, a way to establish deeper levels of self-belief is by surrounding yourself with people that also believe in themselves and where they're going.
Right.
So all the things that we're talking about play into the ability that a man has to be able to have deeper levels of conviction in who he is and where he's going. These are just parts of the equation to be able to establish that so you can show up as the man you need to be in an intimate dynamic with a woman. So getting beyond just the words and the things to say to her and into what actually goes into becoming the guy that has the conviction in who he is to naturally embody the behavior that a lot of the personal development, pick up female help, self-help people are talking about.
Interesting. Something that I remember hearing long time ago. It's who was it that said it? I can't remember. It was someone from the Red Pill community. Anyway, so I think you're the right guy to talk about this. So this whole thing about if you're a man and you're a provider and you make a lot of money and you treat your woman the right way, the woman should be okay with you cheating as much as possible. What's your? I'm gonna give you my opinion, but I want to hear your opinion about this first. So what do you think?
So I want to go a layer deeper,
like
beyond just like the surface level of that, and go deeper into the psychology of what creates a man in a dynamic where he can show up the best way possible with a woman.
Okay.
And so I actually know some women that, I'm not saying all women are like this, but I know some women that are afraid to talk about this because they think they'll be crucified by society that says they're questioning their own self-worth by saying this. But I was speaking to a girl actually the other day, and she was telling me, she's like, I haven't told anybody else this, but I actually would be okay with my man going and sleeping with other women. I'm like, well, why do you say that? She's like, well, because if that's part of what allows him to be able to show up fully as the man he needs to be and present with me, that's all I really care about. But oftentimes is what women do is they hold their men so tight that the guy loses his ability to be able to be the man that she fell in love with. And so now he's a much weaker version of himself. And now she has to take on more of a masculine role because she's created a man that has become soft and weak. So I'm not saying every man has to be able to sleep with other women to be able to feel powerful within himself. But I believe as a woman, giving a man that openness to be able to say, hey, if you feel like that's what you need to do to show up and be the best possible version of yourself with me, then go do it. And also, honestly, a lot of women, they love the element of a little bit of edginess and competition as well when they can get beyond some of the survival ways of being, a little bit of scarcity. And I'm not saying every woman should accept that in her relationship, but if some women were honest about how they're really feeling, they might actually agree with that. But if a man's like, oh, I should be able to sleep with whoever I want, that's very different than coming from it from the angle of, hey, I'm actually my best version of myself with you when I have this ability to be able to do this. So it's a little bit of a different perspective. Not saying it's for everybody, but it makes sense practically to me. And also for a woman, a little cheat code with being able to keep a guy that is of very, very high value, that has a ton of options, is giving him the space to be able to ponder that for himself and not immediately saying, no, I don't deserve this or I don't deserve that. It's like, it's not about deserving. It's about you getting what you want. And I don't think all women truly believe that loyalty is the number one thing. They might say that, but I think ultimately they want to be provided for and have a man that shows up in his optimal power when he is with her, where she doesn't need all the time in the world, but the time she does get is very, very valuable. So it's kind of an interesting conversation, but I have spoken to women that have that perspective, but they're afraid to talk about it because they think women will come down on them for saying they don't believe their self-worth or whatever it is, but it has nothing to do with self-worth.
So I have a pretty different angle on this this whole thing.
Yeah.
There is, if you're in an open relationship and that's what you both agree on, go for it. You know what I mean? I don't really see anything wrong with that. What I see, the issue I have is I'm a person that likes to keep his word, right? If you don't have your word, if you don't have integrity, you have nothing.
It's true.
You literally have nothing.
Mm-hmm.
If we reference the Bible, the first thing that's said is there was the word.
Correct.
So you're literally like, I can't even... A person who doesn't have integrity and doesn't keep their commitments and doesn't do what they say is a person who is literally incomplete. So think of a tire or a spoke of a wheel. If a spoke of a wheel is broken and it can't spin, then that wheel is useless, right? It's out of integrity. It's broken. It's the same thing with human beings. If we're out of integrity and we can't keep our word, then you're useless. You can't.
Correct.
You physically can't.
Lying is never acceptable.
Correct.
Regardless.
So this is where I'm getting at. If you, which is the majority of men who are with other women, by the way, it's from, at least from my experience.
Mm-hmm.
If you gave your word to this woman and you said you would do this and you committed to this and you don't stick to that, then you're the one in the wrong, period.
Agreed.
100%.
Absolutely.
Now, if from the beginning you got with this woman and both of you agreed this is what it is, then hey, listen, it was agreed upon. No one's lying. Everyone knows what's going on.
Yes.
Right?
100%.
Now, technically, is that cheating is the question. No, it's
absolutely not.
That's what it comes down to. I think context, right? We are in a different era, and, you know, if some women are okay with being with a high value man who wants to be with other women, hey, if that's what you agreed upon, you're a grown man, you're a grown woman. If you agreed upon that, listen, do it. You know what I mean? I'm no one to tell you how to live your life. What I'm saying is it just depends on the context. Like, if I'm a younger guy and I'm not ready to be a family man and that's not what I want with my life, that's also you got to take that into consideration. A big thing we do have to take into consideration later on in life is what kind of example do we want to be to our kids if you want to have children. That's a whole other conversation, right?
Yep.
Because I wouldn't want my daughter to be with a guy who's like not committed and kind of sleeping around and being with other women. I would want my woman to be with a hardworking man who provides for her, who's a great father, who's a good husband, and is all the classic things of what a man should be. That's the kind of man I try to be, and that's the man I would want my daughter, if I ever have a daughter, to be with. So, and then, of course, we can go back to the research that's been proven that children are better raised in a nuclear family. I mean, that's just like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I can see what you're saying, but at the same time, it's like, I think there's generally other traits that come with men that are liars that make a family not complete. And I believe if someone, I think I'm a very good, well-rounded man. Obviously, I have things that I'm always looking to improve upon, but here's the thing is I'm not even a proponent of this. I'm just arguing devil's advocate, which I'm open to, right? But I'm not like super convicted in it being my truth.
Right.
But it's like I would take me in what I am, being a provider emotionally, financially, mentally, in my capacity to accumulate resources outside of the family with friends and people that I know, over some other guy who's just gonna give her loyalty. Right. So I don't think there's these two extremes of like, either it's just like together, completely monogamous, perfect relationship, or there's this toxic, terrible, non-present father that is emotionally disconnected.
Right.
I don't think it's the two extremes. I think it's possible. Not for the majority of men, they don't operate like that. But I think there is a upper echelon of men that have the ability to be able to be remarkable human beings and also have that ability to be honest and also be able to show up in a way where they're not completely monogamous to one woman. I think there is an upper echelon of men that have that capacity. Now, I don't think that it's reserved as a right for a man to be like that, because most men aren't shit. So if you truly are that guy,
that's a whole nother conversation.
Okay, which isn't the average man.
Right.
Then I think that's different. But you can't be that dude that's like demanding all these things and you're not shit.
Exactly.
Like, what do you bring to the table as a man, and is it justified or not? So it's important to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself that question.
So I go back to that part of me that wants to be disciplined and have that integrity, right? So now let's talk about this side of it.
Yeah.
Would wanting to be giving into the desire to be with multiple women, isn't that a lot? I see that as a lack of discipline. What do you think?
It depends. It depends on who you are when you really connect to that deeper place inside of yourself. And if you're someone that's never, ever committed to a woman, then that might be a dimension of life that you need to explore. So understanding yourself and where you naturally come from, are you someone that is more hesitant and afraid of connection with a woman and have never committed because of that, and you're hiding behind being with multiple women to be able to justify your behavior? Or are you someone that has always come from maybe a background of deep emotional connection and you've been very monogamous throughout your life? Maybe you need to explore the other end of it. So being able, really what it all comes down to is coming back to a place of truth inside of me. And sometimes that happens to be going to the other end of the spectrum and testing out the waters and see where they're at for you to truly understand where you are as a man. But you're not wrong for doing that one way or another. But I would encourage anyone that comes from naturally one end of the spectrum or the other to experience and explore the other side, to really see for yourself if the way that you're living truly is what you want, or if it's just who you've been and it's who you've adapted to be, and that's why you're choosing to live the life in relation to women that you are.
That's interesting. So this is just my perspective on how things are rolling. The red pill kind of thing is part of it, not all of it, because I agree with some of it. Some of it, I think, is promoting a lack of discipline within young men, a total lack of discipline. And the undisciplined man, as you and I both know, is a train wreck. That's not good for society. It's not good for women. It's not good for anybody.
Yeah.
When a man is undisciplined, it's going to spill over, and it's going to turn into not having discipline in his career, not having discipline in his relationships, not having discipline with his children. It's bad. It spills over into everybody gets affected when the man isn't disciplined.
Yeah.
Discipline is real freedom. Slavery is giving into your impulses. So part of that conversation, and obviously we've hit several points of it, part of that conversation of giving into your impulses is really that it's not good for you to a certain extent, right?
Yep.
So what needs to get defined basically is, when is it me, just the animal inside me, right? That animal instinct of, let's do it. First off, you're a human being and you're not an animal. You have to determine when the animal is trying to take over and when you say, all right, that's not me, that's not what I want. That's just that baser instinct in my brain that's trying to get me to do these things. When in reality, what do I really want? Okay, I want to be committed to a wife and kids, and I want to be a good okay. I don't want to really commit, and I want to explore life, and is that really what I want? Yeah, that's what I want. Okay, then let's go that route. I think it comes down to being disciplined as far as your lifestyle. If you are gonna have multiple partners, limit it. Don't go too crazy, because I've made that mistake too, where you just go gung ho. I'm even a better man when I'm not chasing all these women, because I can become more focused in my goals and my careers, and things get done. Whereas when I was just a party animal in my mid-20s, I didn't really get much done. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But do you hear? Well, first I want to comment on, you say undisciplined. I would say disconnected. So
similar.
So I would say the red pill is teaching men to be disconnected from themselves through only connecting to what makes them feel powerful.
Yes.
And so I think there's a way to go about and live life from a place of not necessarily always impulses, but inspiration. And so just because something might be labeled an impulse, just because there might be a sexual behavior that society would generally label as being an impulse, doesn't mean it can't be an inspiration. And so I think it's very important to be able to, that's why we have to connect with ourselves and understand where we naturally come from, to then be able to dabble in the other side of it so we can understand, is this an impulse or is this an inspiration, regardless of how our mind perceives it as being.
Right.
So I might come from a religious background and I might label these things as being bad, when in reality it's not. It's not bad. There just is inspiration that exists. And so it's up to us to determine what the God-given inspiration is, separate from our construct we've created in our mind of what's good and bad, and be able to connect to that place of inspiration. It's very, very important. But I wanted to comment on what you just said as well. What did you finish with?
Undisciplined man is bad for society. It spills over into everything.
No, the last part. I wanted to make sure I commented on it. The last thing that you said. You gave a little
impulse. Is this the animal in me, or is this what I really want? Any of that stuff?
Yeah, I think the big point I wanted to hammer home was being able to give yourself permission to explore the other end of the spectrum that you might come from, and allow yourself to get beyond what your programming thinks is right and wrong, good and bad. And that might feel a little scary to people because they find a sense of control in their beliefs, but it's very important. Now I remember what I wanted to say. I think a lot of times guys, they'll be party animals. Like it's the two extremes again, right?
Oh, when I was a party animal in my mid-20s.
Right, it's like, I was a party animal. I was banging a bunch of chicks, and I realized that I wasn't very disciplined, and I realized I needed to be with one girl, and so I got rid of all the hoes, and now I'm with one girl, and it's much better. But it's like, what if there's a space that exists where you're not an undisciplined piece of shit, and you are on your path, and you are calm and collected and disciplined in what you're doing, and there's a space to have deeply emotionally and physically connected relationships with women outside of just a shallow surface level, us getting hammered and fucking. Like, I think that exists, but dudes don't talk about that. They're like, oh, I was a piece of shit and I was banging a bunch of chicks and it was going crazy, having super disconnected relationship dynamics. And then they went the other end of the spectrum. It's like, I don't necessarily agree that's how it has to be. Like, I think we're capable of being very emotionally connected within ourselves and not being a piece of shit and not having just shallow surface level connections where we're manipulating and using women, but where we are very connected to ourselves and we can have honest, open relationships where we are openly providing value to each other in a way where it's honest and have it be a very mutually beneficial thing. So what I think I'm constantly doing is constantly bringing us back to, like, talk about the Buddha, the middle way. It's like, yeah, here's always the two extremes, and there's the middle way. And there's always this middle way that I'm very interested in exploring and understanding. Because what do people normally talk about? The extremes, right? And so I want to discover and uncover what exactly those middle grounds are and what they look like and how they feel to me personally.
Buddha's the only guy you can't deny because he's the only one that tells you, listen, I'm going to teach you all this stuff, but go find out for yourself.
That's it.
Don't take my word for it. Go out and try it. See for yourself. You don't believe what I'm telling you. He's the only, and it's not even a religion. That's more like a philosophy and a way of life. He's the only one where you can say, man, there's nothing I can really say about this guy or criticize him, because at the end of the day, he's basically telling me to go do it on my own.
Because but that's the point.
Yep.
The point is constant self-exploration. That's it. Being able to move beyond our biases of who we believe we are and into the place of inspiration. I think that's what he's saying. It's like, let go of any idea that you have of right and wrong, good and bad. And here's the thing. I know people would hear that and be like, well, all chaos would ensue if we do that. But I don't think so. I do not believe so.
Chaos, there's a fine line between order and chaos. And I think what you want to explore is that fine line.
Absolutely. That's literally how I live my life.
How fine is it? Is it as small as we think it is? Yeah. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I go play in the deep end, man. That's what I'm here for. I go to the places that other people don't and won't. And most people won't ever go to the places that I go to. I don't expect other people to. I don't expect my clients to. But by me going out and exploring the depths of what's actually out there, then it allows me to understand the middle ground a little better. Whereas if most people are in that middle space, they're not going to the extremes like I am, I can help them understand the middle space better because I've gone well beyond that space. So, I mean, that's just kind of who I am, like an apple tree apples, man. I'm just a guy that likes to explore the outer echelon of what's possible and question things and test things out and really, really see firsthand what it's like to experience.
I'm a firm believer in the gray area. There's no there is black and there is white, but there is also gray, meaning there is right and wrong, but things aren't always right and wrong. Sometimes there's certain things about that specific situation that make it gray, you know. And I didn't realize that until a couple of years ago. It was a very interesting realization for me personally, because I have friends that I'm a person that I've always had all kinds of friends, but really, again, going internal and doing a lot of self-reflection over the last couple of years, I've ran into the world has put me in positions where I meet people where normally, if I wouldn't have been in that kind of introverted mindset where I'm really going deep and looking inside myself, I wouldn't pay attention to this person from a perspective of, okay, they did this, this, and this, but in their situation, this was involved. And all right, so maybe I shouldn't judge them based on what they've done, but more about who they are as a person. And maybe if I judge other people by who they are as a person and not the mistakes they've made, maybe other people will treat me the same. It's because of that reflection and that, again, looking inward, that I actually have came up with some of the best realizations in my life. It wasn't even reading a specific book. It was more just quieting the mind, looking internally, and walking the gray area, if you will, walking the line. So I can relate to you.
Yeah.
I can relate to what you're saying.
No, it's beautiful. And it takes a lot of courage to be able to walk that space of clicking the button of the unknown and seeing what happens. I've always been an instigator to some extent of life. Even in high school, my friends called me the instigator, and liking to walk the boundaries of what are and aren't acceptable, but it's fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's funny how, so Keyen is actually a former NFL football player, funny enough. So not a person you would expect to have a philosophical conversation on a podcast, but that's cool. We went a lot of different directions. I really like where this went. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, me too. I agree. And that's why anybody listening to this, I hope that, we went deep into some areas philosophically, but really everything, the foundation of how to be able to show up in today's world powerfully in a way that you can show up in the way that you need to for a woman or women, whatever you prefer, comes down to knowing yourself, knowing who you are, and being able to pursue whatever that is at the highest level, and not being afraid to get a little messy in the process. In the process of discovering who you are and what you want, it requires you to play fast and to do things that might not be the end-all be-all. But by being willing to play in both extremes, being able to play in the shallow end, also the deep end, and eventually ending somewhere in the middle, that's where it's at. So don't feel like you have to just sit in the middle and start there, but figure out where you are right now. Like I said, in regard to relationship dynamics, are you someone that is very committed and loyal to one person and you're very easily able to attach to one person? Go to the other end of the spectrum. And maybe that's not going to be where you end up, but just try it and see what happens. Click the button. What's going to happen? Then maybe you'll end up somewhere in the middle. But don't be afraid to get a little messy. It's important.
Unexplored territory. I've noticed, I love history. And going back to what you said about people a long time ago who didn't have much resources, who accomplished unimaginable things that even would be difficult even in today's society. It fascinated me that there was people who did these things, like Julius Caesar, who did the most insane things you could ever imagine. He kept getting into debt and debt and debt. He kept borrowing money and going on campaigns and borrowing money and borrowing money. He was so convinced that he was going to like conquer some foreign land and get these spoils of war and become the richest man in Rome that he just, it's like millions and millions of dollars that he just kept borrowing money and borrowing money. Imagine having that much conviction in yourself that you're just like, yeah, I could go $100 million in debt. I'm going to make it back 10 times, you know, because, and he saw, you know, and he probably accomplished actually more than he planned because he ended up becoming the emperor of Rome, when in reality, his whole goal was just to conquer, like find a foreign territory, conquer it and get rich. And then he did like so much more, you know. It's these people, and I can relate to that too. Like, I find people fascinating, their motivations, why they do things, why they are the way they are. So exploring that unknown territory, I've noticed throughout history, the men that are willing to do that are the ones that see extraordinary results. So that's definitely something I hope to do as well. And I try to do things that make me uncomfortable, and do things that I've never done before. I may not be necessarily good at, because I know in the growth and maybe even in the failing, I'll learn a lot about myself, you know. And ultimately, the more you just the man who learns more, the man who discovers himself understands the universe. The man who tries to discover the universe knows nothing about himself. I read that in a great book.
Beautifully said.
Yeah, it's a book by Deepak Chopra. It's called The Book of Secrets. Very good book. Keyen, we have been here an hour. This is nuts. I feel like we've been talking 5 minutes.
I know. It feels like we just started. This is incredible.
So thank you for coming. I always end my podcast asking 3 questions.
Cool.
So first question, what inspires you?
My curiosity for life. Just there's this like underlying curiosity, this childlike curiosity that I have that constantly inspires me to want to keep going. And I'm not saying that there's not moments where I get a little tired, but ultimately that keeping that spark alive, that childlike curiosity, that's what inspires me. It's just continually exploring more of the unknown territory, the infinite unknown territory of life that keeps me excited about it.
So obviously you remember that saying we used to hear when we were kids, curiosity killed the cat. There's a second part to the saying that most people don't know.
Tell me.
Curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. What he found out was so satisfying and so invigorating, it brought him back from death itself.
The death and the resurrection.
Yeah, these old sayings. I would recommend it. Have you ever heard of the Emerald Tablet? You know what that is?
I've heard of it, but not.
The Emerald Tablet is this tablet that's like in Egypt, and it's based in Hermeticism. Hermeticism is this ancient teachings that's based in Thoth, and later he became known as Hermes in Greek mythology. And it's this list of things, of teachings, and it's literally scribed on a tablet made of emerald in Egypt, and I would highly recommend it. You would it's crazy how ancient true wisdom is, because you read this thing and it's like 85% of these sayings you've already heard.
Of course.
You know.
Yeah, so what's the point? It's like just more mental masturbation. You know, it's like, even if it is written, it's like, okay, well, now what? Stay curious, man. Just stay curious. Stay open, exploring, and keep following the inspiration. Yeah. That's what I say. My inspiration is Forrest Gump.
That's awesome.
Always. And he's not very intelligent. But that guy lived a hell of a life. Why? Because he didn't have a brain that stopped him from going after the inspirations that God planted on his heart. That's it. I'm the only person that's ever said that. The Forrest Gump stuff. But
definitely.
Yeah, he's my inspiration, man.
Definitely the only guy who's ever said that on my podcast when
Absolutely.
I asked him. Second question. What's next for Keyen?
Oh, man. I'm just here, man. Like, I don't know. I get excited about things every day, and I just follow whatever that excitement is. I'm going to the UFC weigh-ins this afternoon.
That's awesome.
And I have a fun date planned tonight.
You going to fight tomorrow?
That's what's next for me. No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
No. But yeah, I that's what's next for me, is going to that, and I'm just going to be fully there.
That's awesome. Yeah. Sugar Sean O'Malley versus Cheeto Vera. That's going to be a good one. Cheeto's the only guy who's ever beat him.
Really?
Yeah. So they get to, in the first fight, he beat Sugar when he was on the way up, and he had, like, he was undefeated, knocked out all these guys, and then Cheeto came in and basically broke his leg. So it was pretty cool, because after that, Cheeto kept winning, and now he became the champion. So they're basically, it's like literally the only guy who ever beat him. So
that'd be good.
It'd be very interesting. Last question, my brother. What, how do you want to be remembered when you're no longer here?
I don't really care. I don't care to be remembered. I'd be more curious just to know what exactly people would think about me when I'm gone, but I don't really care to be remembered. I don't really think about it much. I would just come back to like where I'm at, what I'm excited about, and following that, and whatever happens as a result when I pass away, it just is what it is. So almost like ignorantly just pursuing what's in front of me and being as present as possible in those experiences. And then maybe I'll have the opportunity to see and look down upon the world and what my influence did to it. But I don't really think about it much. I just stay connected to where I am and follow that and do that in perpetuity.
Keyen, thank you again for being here. Appreciate your time. How can people connect with you?
Follow me on Instagram, official Keyen. That's the only spot.
Thank you, bro.
Thanks for having me, brother. Appreciate you, Nelson.
Righty, guys. That was another episode of Montana Method Podcast. Host Nelson Rodriguez, special guest Keyen. Appreciate you guys. As always, leaving with the same message. Push it to the limit. The world is yours. If you're not chasing a dream, life is meaningless, guys. Say goodnight to the bad guy.
I've been out here hustling all my life. Every day we get into it. Really out here in these streets. That's day and night. Like there's nothing to it. When I was going through it, dog, I never got your call. I never asked for nothing, no. But now I want it all. I promise I'ma do it. Came from rags to riches. Rags to riches. Came from rags to riches. Rags to riches. Came from